You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hey y'all, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. As always, I am your host, Nef, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Rich Stachon. Rich has more than 15 years of experience as an art and design educator at Glen Crest Middle School in Glen Ellen, Illinois. In 2016, he was named the Illinois Art Educator of the Year. But before he did all of that, he earned his bachelor's degree from Northern Illinois University and a master's degree from right here in Florida at Full Sail University. He's also an adjunct professor at the Art of Education University. Rich, welcome to EdTech Heroes.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I feel honored to be here. So thanks for having me on today to talk about some awesome stuff.
Yeah, I think the honor is ours, actually. We were talking a little bit before the show about art education, about technology, and it dawned on me that we have not had an art educator on the show. So I'm really excited for you to be able to share that perspective with us.
Yeah, it's great. As we were speaking, hearing from so many different educators and different classes and where they come from, and obviously we all have things that are in common, but obviously within particular, subjects and classrooms, things are different. So I'm excited to share with you my insights.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go way back a little bit.
All
How
right.
did you become an art teacher? Like, were you growing
Wow.
up and decided, you know what, when I get older, I am going to be an art and design teacher? Or at what stage in your life did the light bulb kind of go off there?
It was later, honestly. I am not going to say that I grew up wanting to be a teacher at all. I knew I wanted to do something with art for sure. I think that, I went to Columbia College in Chicago for animation, actually, film
Mm,
and video and animation. And I did wonderful my first year when I was still living at my home with my mother. And then kind of, 18, got a little bit of freedom and kind of things just kind of, went different directions. So my path kind of went through, playing in a punk rock band, delivering pizzas, and then thinking, I'm 23 years old, what I want to do with my life. And I remembered, I loved art. Let's get back to art. And I went to community college over here. And in order to stay with the curriculum of just the
mhm.
regular classes, I kept on taking art classes, and I really found my love and just, getting back into it and said, hey, you know what? I really think I could do something with as a teacher. And that's when I went to Northern.
That is so cool. Do you tell your students about your background as a punk rocker?
I do a little bit, yeah. I don't like go crazy with it, but today or yesterday, I had a little quiz, one of the first days of school, and kind of did like a little bit, especially my sixth graders. I teach sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. Sixth graders don't know me except for maybe if they had a brother or a sister that came to school here, but they don't know any of the answers. So I kind of just at the last one was like, what instrument did I play in my punk rock band? And they're like, what instruments are in a band? And then they're like, oh, you were in a band, but more importantly, they were more curious. Did I have hair? What, did you have hair when you were in the band? But yeah, so that's my background. And yeah, but basically it really came from, honestly, in college, I had a teacher who was, pretty good teacher, but it wasn't kind of like, I wasn't getting out of the class what I wanted to. And I remember complaining to one of my best friends, like, man, this teacher is not really giving me what I want. And they're like, well, how about you become a teacher? And I was like, all right, I can do that. I think I will.
Challenge accepted, huh?
Yeah.
And are you still in touch with that friend to tell them, like, look, I did it. I became a
Yeah.
teacher.
No doubt. It's a childhood friend of mine, and he my best man at my wedding. So yeah, I see him and talk to him. Not as much as I want to, but I see him enough. But yeah, we talk about every once in a while. I was saying, hey, you kind of changed like where I was going with my life and my career, and I talk about that with my students too. Honestly, I'm pretty open.
Hey,
I believe that art and life, right, and that's what we're trying to do here as educators, right? Trying to have them beyond the walls of the classroom. So I talked to them a little bit about my past and how I didn't have this straight road to college and high school, college, career. It was more like, high school, college, finding myself and then figuring out, okay, here's what I really want to do, what I have my passion for, and then I went after it.
yeah, I think that's so important to be authentic with our kids and to give them a little bit of a glimpse into who we are as individuals. I want to talk a little bit about when you got to that master's degree at Full Sail.
All
And
right.
I'm imagining that that is probably post finding yourself. The punk rock band was no longer a
Right.
thing. And you got a master's not just in education, but it's in education media design and technology. I think a lot of times when I and other folks think about the art classes that we took growing up, there was no technology there, right? We were
Right.
painting, we were doing lots of things, and it felt very divorced from anything that we would consider to be ed tech in 2022. So, can you talk a little bit about how that was married in that master's program? And maybe even what led you to want to pursue not just a traditional art education degree, but something that was going to infuse that technology piece.
Yeah, so man, you are bringing me back here. This is and a lot. It's weird because a lot of my whys and a lot of the things that I do in my classroom right now, obviously influence my past has influenced how I teach, and even going back to my punk rock days, and there's this podcast I can't think of it. I think it's called the Punk Rock Classroom, and I listened to it a couple of times, and I still every so often listen to it. But really, they really talk about how like that DIY feel, like do it yourself kind of like I was making my own flyers for my shows. I was the one booking our
Neat.
gigs, like that influenced me as being a teacher, right? Because I'm doing kind of all this kind of stuff myself and doing it. And if I want something, I'm doing it myself. And then going into that program, it was odd because, I just got the job at Glen Crest and I was like, you know what? Now's the time to get my master's because I just want to hit it hard. I don't have any kids yet, just got married and let's do it. And it was an online program and it was only 1 year, but it was like straight up a class a month,
Mhm.
really hardcore. And I don't even think they call the degree that anymore. It's something different, but it was really intense. The benefit I did have is that I did have some previous computer knowledge and they made you, or didn't made you, but they suggested you buy a Mac computer and the software and stuff. And I was pretty familiar with it already. But the reason I wanted to get into it is because when I was at Columbia College, 1998 to like 2000, honestly, I wasn't even into technology. I was all about like traditional animation. And I kind of thought that computer animators were, faking or they didn't know art because they were using the computers to make the artwork. I quickly found out my time there that those conversations and those arguments I was having with these other students, it was pointless. They knew about art just as well as I knew about art. They knew how to draw just as well. They just chose a different medium to use it. And so when I, had the opportunity to go get my master's degree, I'm like, you know what? I think I want to go with something with technology. I'm into traditional art. Don't get me wrong. I almost got my sculpture, a BFA in sculpture at Northern, because I took so many classes, but I wanted to get student teaching so quick that I stopped short of it. But I'm like, I want technology. I want something that challenges me and something that I haven't kind of like really gone into art wise. And I think it was just a great marriage. And I think that what happened was I got to meet with a lot of people from around the country and I got to collaborate with them. And I think that what happened was, just so many different ideas and bringing back the film ideas that I've had, it really came together and learning all these different programs really helped me out to see where it lied. It was early. It was like, oh, wait, right? I think I got it or 09 and, very early on online learning platforms of things. And I think that continued to bridge what I was doing there into the classroom as far as technology wise goes.
Yeah, that's cool to get an opportunity to be able to explore something that you didn't explore at Northern. And also to be able to have that sort of wide breadth of experience to impart on your middle school kids. One of the things that you said that kind of stood out to me was buying this MacBook to be able to fully engage
Right.
in the classes at Full Sail. And I think for lots of folks, myself included, when we think about devices that are sort of at the heart of creativity, we think about Apple. At least I do. And this is not an advertisement for
Right.
Apple or anything like that. But if I had to think prototypically, what does a designer use? I think about their tools. But when we think about classrooms, especially over the last 4 to 5 years, it's been a lot of Chromebooks. And
Yeah.
from what I understand, that's actually what you all are using as well. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how you are able to use this sort of more lightweight device, although Chromebooks can do some pretty cool things these
Right.
days? But how do you kind of allow your students to do some pretty cool things on lightweight devices?
So my school now is one-to-one. It wasn't one-to-one in Chromebooks, but it has been for the past 3 years now. And so, yes, that's primary device. I do happen to have a classroom set of iPads, just to let you know. But I do utilize Chromebooks a lot, especially when we were remote. And we still utilize them. And I'll talk about this one app I really like to use in a little bit. But I think what has happened in tech is that there's a whole bunch of web-based applications that are
Mm.
close to what say Photoshop is or Illustrator. I mean, you have Photopea, which is like a great alternative, and it's web-based. If you have access to the internet and a web browser, you could access it. So it's great for Chromebook, right? It used to be called the Gravit. It's now called Corel Vector. It's a vector-based program that's, alternative to Illustrator. So I think that these web-based applications have really, they're not, there's limitations, of course, but they could give kids and adults, very close experiences to what those other programs are doing. And
Mm.
really it's just building, confidence. I teach middle school, right? So like my whole idea about everything is I know they're not going to master everything that I'm teaching them. I have 7 weeks with these students. Let's be honest, right? And what can I instill? And honestly, really what it is about thinking. It's about the process. And yeah, if you could learn some of these apps and get into it, but really then when I'm not, here, when you don't have art, or how are you going to be learning them and can you use them and having, their devices, like you said, if they can't afford or they don't have heavy duty, hardware, they could still use the stuff that they have and then they could continue to learn. So that's my role, I believe, is I'm trying to instill in them the process, the ideas, get them rolling in. Hey, I want to learn more about it. And then they're going to go outside of the classroom walls and learn about it themselves as well.
That makes a lot of sense of at least giving them exposure to lots of things that they might be able
Exactly.
to encounter later on, and the amount of design thinking that might help them
Yeah.
understand how to solve problems in this genre makes a whole lot of sense.
So like I said, it's just honestly, it's a tech has really gone. They understand, I think, that hey, people are using Chromebooks a lot. We need to build these
Mm,
web-based apps like that. So I think that, the demand for it is here more than it used to be.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I know you're not just using some of these web-based tools in your art classroom. You also have remixed some tools that we've talked about in other episodes of the show to make them be relevant for your curriculum, relevant for the students that you're teaching. One of which is video, which obviously we talk
Right.
quite extensively about on this
Yeah.
podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about how you're using video as an art educator?
Yeah. So I would, it's weird. So I guess I have somewhat of a faux flip classroom in a way.
Okay.
I think that I kind of started that pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. I had this amazing, I'll give her a shout out, Brittany Thomas. She was a student teacher of mine. She's a high school teacher now. And I was kind of messing around with video, at the time, but she really, and this was probably about 6 years ago, was like, hey, I got these ideas. I'm like, let's roll with them. And she started introducing herself on video and we started a Google Sites with her video. And the kids like loved it. It showed so much of a different site. They had resources for them outside of the classroom. They could go ahead and view if they wanted to learn more about the topic. It had choice. So, I'm not necessarily like a flipped classroom. I'm not necessarily a tab or choice-based classroom. Kind of mix of a lot of stuff. But what I use video for is a lot of different reasons. Number one is for instruction, just resources. When I'm teaching, especially like my graphic design class, I still like doing that live demo. I don't know why. I feel like it's necessary. I think that students have questions right away
Mhm.
that they want answered. And so I still do a live demo on different apps and things that I'm doing, even though I could just record a video for it. But I do that and have a video. So that way students are expected to obviously go through it as I'm teaching them, but then they're going to have questions, right? So instead of me answering, 15 different questions, I have videos on a site that they could go back of what I just kind of taught about and they could check it out real time and kind of go at their own pace. And it really leads to them, going above and beyond or just really doing things quicker and more at their pace. And I really enjoy
Mm.
that. So I have a big mix. Like it's not just asynchronous where, hey, you watch this at home, you come into class and you're ready to roll. I'm still showing you live demo. I'm using that as kind of like, hey, let's get you caught up if you miss a day or you really don't understand the concept or what's going on. And here are some videos possibly, hey, you really like doing this? Here's something I really didn't teach in school. Let's keep on going with that. That's one way. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I definitely want to hear about some other ways, but I think that's interesting, right? I think sometimes you might think about this as dichotomous. It's like either you're doing it live or you're doing it asynchronously, but we could be doing it in both ways to be able to answer those questions that come up in the moment, have some of that live discussion, understand exactly where there might be misconceptions, and then give students a resource to be able to look at later. Which I know, like, the first time I use a design tool, right? Like getting into Figma or something like that, I'm like, give me that video. I need to see it over and over and over again so that I can actually understand how to wrap my head around this. But yeah, like give me one more way that
All right,
you're
so
using
one more.
video. I'm curious to
So,
see.
so this kind of covers like, some stuff that I see other art educators doing. And I'll give another shout out. Her name is Carrie Parrish. And so the Illinois Art Education Association, has their annual conference. And I remember one year I was kind of talking about like, we always talk about like as art educators, we talk about process. Like it's about the process. But it's so weird because like a lot of the time it's like we always focus and what do we show people, right? We always show the finished product, right? People don't always get
Hmm.
to see like what happened and the process of the mistakes, the things that happened, the different iterations of that, right? So I kind of was talking about that and she really ran with it. Like she took it and she like designed all this awesome things to do with showing process. And one of the ways was using video and really having the idea of she had multiple different things, but I thought this one was really cool where using QR codes, she would post this piece of paper up in her hallways at school of student artwork and would have a photo of the current stage of whatever the artwork was in, right? And then the QR code, students could scan it and then follow what like the process. So it wasn't just the end product that she put up and say, "Hey, watch the process." It was, "Hey, this is kind of like one stage of it. If you want to keep on seeing it grow and see the process of it, follow it here." And I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, "Wow, the conversation that I had with you a year ago about process, I never imagined that it would turn like this and the way that you're utilizing video with your students." And it was really awesome to see that. And I'm not necessarily at that point of doing all that stuff right now in my school, but it does inspire me to kind of do more things like that.
Yeah, that's wild. I kind of think of times where I've gotten an opportunity to go see a live painting being created or to listen to an amazing artist talk. And even though artist talks are amazing, you're hearing the person recount what that process is. You don't necessarily get to like be a fly on the wall as they're going through that process,
Right.
but video gives you this cool way to do that. And I mean, I'm not an art educator by any stretch of the imagination, but I would imagine that that also opens up this new level of understanding student proficiency and student process where you can go back and see those videos and understand, to your point, the mistakes, the triumphs, how did we get to this finished product?
Yeah, and it's important for us as art educators to do that, but it's also great for the students, right? Because to be honest with you, they're doing all that kind of thinking as they're going, and sometimes they don't even realize it, right? They
Mhm.
know that, hey, that doesn't look right, and they'll really quick, erase it, or if they're on an iPad or something, undo it, or a Chromebook, undo, and then they'll change it. But they're doing it in the moment, right? But when they see it kind of played back, they're kind of like, whoa, all right, so you know what happened here? What were you thinking? And to stop it and kind of talk to them about it and have them kind of process it, not in the moment of doing it, but afterwards and really reflect on it is really key. And like I said, that's one of the things that I've been trying to focus on with my students is, think about why we're doing these things and kind of take a step back from, all right, well, I'm done with it. Okay, you're done with it, but let's take a look and where was the process? Where do we learn and what do we actually learn? So video is really key with that. On our iPads, there's some apps that as they're drawing it, it captures everything, right? And then going back and
Mhm.
we could do things like, have them then put on another program and have them talk over it and reflect and pick a section or two to say, hey,
Yeah.
here's a spot where I changed. I was going this direction, but this was kind of like the pivot where I was like, okay, this needs to go somewhere else with where I was going. And they can't necessarily do that in time and explain it, but afterwards they can.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? Like, I think we've heard a lot in education about reflect, reflect, reflect. And that's so important. And it's an important part of the learning process, no doubt. But I think it's also important to think about when is the appropriate time in which we want students to reflect. Like there certainly is some reflection that happens in the moment, but it's also interesting that you have sort of created this separation between the amount of, I guess, like metacognition that's happening as folks are engaging in an actual assignment. And then what we're able to piece out if we have a week or 2 weeks and we think a little bit about what we're thinking. That's kind of wild, right? Like how do students react to that when you ask them, hey, go reflect on this thing that you did 2 weeks ago, that you did 3 weeks ago?
Right. It's hard. It really is because let's be honest, the youth today, it's all about like now, right? Let's get this done. And, how can I get satisfied? But I think that when you put value on something as an educator and you really stick, with it and you really show them that this is something that I value and you build that relationship with students, then they do too. Right. It's like when students tell me, I can't draw, I can't do this. I always get sixth graders who come in who are just telling me that I can't do this, I can't do that, whatnot. It's just like, well, either somewhere along the line you were told that, or the value wasn't placed on this, right? So I think that, to answer your question, is that they give me at first, like, what do you mean I'm supposed to do this? But I think after, the first or second time of going through it, they're like, all right, well, obviously Mr. Stachon is putting value on this. And if he's putting value on this, and that means that we should be spending time on it. And I think eventually, maybe not all of them, but I hope a majority of them understand the value of going back and doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much there, right? In terms of not just teaching kids our subjects, but also teaching them how to best interact in our classrooms, what to value as learners. And we kind of don't know how that like kind of follows kids, right? Like you're like, okay, Mr. Stachon values reflecting. And so they reflect in your class because maybe that's tied to their grades and lots of things. But then we also have this like really interesting effect where maybe they also start to reflect in other aspects of their learning or start to
Mhm.
reflect in other aspects of their lives because they've taken on some of what we value as educators, which is cool. That's what we're here for.
Right. And if you think about it, right, I mean, they're with us more than they're at home, right, during the school year. So, I mean, if we are those role models and we're those people who are putting, all that together and talking about that, then, no doubt they're going to be, it's going to rub off. It's going to definitely rub off. And it's interesting, us just talking about this conversation, it's weird pulling back, why I do the things I do and how it really works. I bet you didn't expect to get in this conversation about, kind of this stuff, but, it's just very interesting. And students, it's like, it's I don't hit them over the head with this kind of stuff, right? It kinda just happens, right? And that's the great part about it because they're still having a good time and they're still learning, but they're not necessarily, being like, "Well, okay, he's really wanting me to reflect or he really wants to see the process." Well, no, I'm
Hmm.
still doing my art. I'm still doing I'm still communicating ideas and expressing the way that I wanna express through my artwork while still doing that kind of other work. So, like I said, it's so many different layers and levels. And sometimes that's why it's hard to sometimes like, really reflect on years that I've done stuff because everyone's so different. And it's like, okay, what can I do better this year? What are my goals for this year? And it's just kind of like, okay, well, what did I do last year? Let's focus on that and let's bring it up another level.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm kind of curious, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but as somebody who has always taught gen ed, right? I feel like there is this kind of perception from kids. Like if they come into my class and they think it's boring, it's almost like, well, this was an English class. So what the heck did I expect?
Right.
Right. Um,
Right.
Not to hate on English teachers, I am one of you. But I think when folks come into an art class, they kind of expect a different level of engagement. They expect a different amount of sort of fun, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it sounds like you've been able to deliver that. Like you've got a 3D printer behind you. Kids are learning about different design tools. They're doing all sorts of like awesome things. Does that feel like something that ever weighs on you? Are you like, look, I gotta make this class fun. I gotta make kids like art. Is that something you wake up and care about?
I think not so much like that. I think that those questions do happen, but it's not that particular question. I think it's more like, I always think about my sixth grade curriculum, like what am I trying to do with these students who came from elementary school, and elementary teachers our teachers that we do have are great, but they see them once a week, right? So it's really hard to
Mhm.
get in a rhythm of a class. Once again, it's about value, right? So, we're very grateful that we have art here in this community and that they have art once a week. And there's some communities that don't have that, right? So don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying when you have it once a week, it's hard to get in that groove, and it's hard to really. So when they come to my class and they're with me for 7 straight weeks, it's a little bit. And so I think I feel the pressure of that. Like, can I, to a student who, like you said, expects the fun, but kind of, was like, all right, well, I only had it once a week, so it's all right. Like, or I'm more of like thinking, hey, how can I really get them to be like, art isn't just like going to the museum and putting, hands
Mhm.
behind the back and looking at art. Like, I'm trying to think, how can I engage them in a way that they understand that art is all around us and that they're engaging with art and design every single day. They just don't realize it. And I think that by kind of changing the perspective and me thinking about that, I do make it fun, right? It kind of just comes as a byproduct of me thinking, hey, how can I make them think about art differently than they already do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of a tall order for 7 weeks, though, to get kids to understand how ubiquitous art is. But I guess, like, even as we're having this conversation, especially if we think about design as part of art, it is literally everywhere. But
Yes.
but I mean, do you feel like kids come to those realizations after 7 weeks of being with you?
No, but I think that, once again, the value and the things like, if I
Mm,
did a camera shot around my room, obviously I have a whole bunch of pop culture type stuff and, things. So it just me talking, I talk a lot, not too much, but I talk a lot, especially when they're working, right? I truly am a believer that students can be doing something and have their head down and looking down at a piece of paper or on a computer or on an iPad, and still listen, right? I think that they
mhm.
don't have to necessarily give me contact. Now, after I'm done talking, I would like something said to me like, hey, I understand either, non-verbally or verbally, but I think that they could still hear me. So I talk to them a lot when they're working about different things that pop up, whether it's a conversation that a kid is having about, their, sneakers that they just bought or something. And we get into conversations about, sneaker design. And I'm like, oh, did you see this? Did you realize, Air Jordans almost never happened? And he almost left, he didn't even want to be a part of Nike. And they're like, really? And then we talk about all this stuff and the iterations of, the Jordan shoe, and it's crazy stuff. And then, so I try to feed off of them. I think so. Part of it is me reacting and responding to all the different things that pop up in my classroom to make it kind of known that, hey, maybe we're not doing projects about shoes, or we're not doing projects about more than just, typical art stuff that they think is typical, but we're talking about it and I'm bringing it up. And then I think they understand that through the 7 weeks. And what's really beneficial is that a couple years ago, we switched up our curriculum a little bit for our electives, or our exploratories. And I now have two eighth grade classes, and one is like an advanced art class. Nothing advanced about it. I always tell the students, like, I don't, the name isn't necessarily the tell-all, like, because they're like, well, do I have to be really good at art to be an advanced art? I'm like, no, it's an extension of what you already know. That's why they're calling it advanced, right? But that's more like, what they want to make art about. But I have another one that's more of like a commercial-based art class. It's got a really long title. I didn't make it up, but it's very long. It's design and engineering / architecture. And I have a lot of
Okay.
students in that class who the focus on that class is less about, hey, I want to make a statement about something, so I'm going to make art about this. It's more like we're designing products and we're solving problems that people have, and it's for other people. So we're making things, designing things for other people in mind. And I think a lot of students really gravitate to that, especially the students that aren't necessarily ones who are like, I got, in eighth grade, I got a whole bunch to say that I want to communicate through my artwork. I got a lot of students who are like, I don't know what I want to say yet, right? I'm still kind of forming my values and my beliefs, but I do know that if you give me a problem to something, I could solve it. And I'm like, that's great, and then they really gravitate and they're like, man, this class was really good. This is not like the art that we were doing before. And I'm like, it's not, it's a different, kind of side of, like I said, the design aspect of it versus the true traditional art aspect. And I get a lot of student buy-in through that too. I think, so maybe they don't understand, very long answer to your question. after 7 weeks in my sixth grade. But by the time they're in eighth grade, I think they get it. I think they understand.
Yeah. What's that like, right? Because like you're following your kids. You have them in sixth grade, you have them in seventh grade, you have them in eighth grade. Is that correct? Where you get to see them 3 years in a
Yeah,
row for some
for,
kids at least.
yeah, for most I do see all 3 years. There's some that I don't see eighth grade because they got put into or they chose a different elective and it wasn't either one of my art classes. But most students I do. So it's nice. I mean what's really great about it is that you start seeing obviously you see their growth, but you start seeing to where it clicks, right? That light bulb. And that's when you're like, okay, this is why I do this, right? It's why I teach. This is why I'm here. This is why it's why I belong here because this kind of stuff. And that is magic to see that kind of click. And I talk about magic because like teaching middle school and high school is different, right? Than teaching elementary school because everything is magic in elementary school. To young kids, it's like, boom, whoa. It's like, hey, how'd that cup get there? Oh, wow. Hey, crazy. But you do that stuff in middle school, they're like, oh, whatever. Right. So they're not as into it. But in order to see some of those kids really figure out what they really want, and you're like, oh, it's not because I want it, it's because you want it. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I can imagine. I haven't had the experience of being able to follow kids or have them multiple years, but even just when I taught seventh grade and then seeing them the next year walk around the hallway and have conversations with them about what they were doing in their ELA classes and all of that, it is sort of that really those really cool moments that you want as an educator and you get to see that. So yeah, that's awesome. But before we kind of wrap up,
All right.
and I know you're preparing for curriculum night, and maybe somebody listening to this is on the heels of their own curriculum night or open house or something like that. So really cool that we got to talk to you right before parents flood into your classroom to learn a little bit about what you just talked about. But before we let you go, I want to talk a little bit more about technology in art classrooms specifically. Can you share just a couple resources or a couple tools or however you want to take the conversation for art educators who potentially have not infused technology in their classroom just
Right.
yet and are listening to this and wondering, where do I start to be able to get kids to come to some of the realizations that your kids have come to?
Yeah. So first, I'm just going to give a piece of advice. I think that more often than not, art educators or just educators in general with utilizing technology, I think that you have to do it, right? It's just something that I think that
Mm,
you don't need to know everything about a particular application or program in order to teach it. I think that's the biggest misconception out there is that you have to be the master of something. I'm not the master of Illustrator, Photoshop, any of the things that we use, at all. Once again, I'm bringing them the ability to do it. Do you have to feel comfortable? Yeah, but you have to kind of just go with it. And I always bring back the story. In 2016, I got my first 3D printer, and I was like, "Wow, I got this from a grant, and it sat in a box for a month." And then I was like, "What am I doing here? I had this wonderful device here that I could use. I need to figure this out." And I'm like, "I don't know how to use any kind of CAD software." Well, I found Tinkercad, and I'm like, "This is wonderful." Did I know everything about it? No, but I started using it with the students. We all started teaching each other. The students like, "Hey, you know what? I went home with this and I found this out." And then I tell the next class to this student. So we built this community of learners where it wasn't just me, the mage on a stage, kind of talking and mastering about it, but it was all these students kind of talking, "Oh, I know about this. Oh, I learned this. Oh, I just got done. I made this mistake,
mhm.
but this happened." So I think number one is you definitely kind of just gotta let it go and just get out there. You don't need to know everything. Start utilizing. But utilize this. You got to think about why you're utilizing it in the classroom. Why are you really trying to do this? Why do you want to bring it into your classroom? Is it just a replacement of something, right? Or are you trying to make some transformative change within your classroom? And it's all right to me, honestly. If you utilize something as a substitute, that's fine. But realize that it's kind of like being evaluated as a teacher, right? You're not always in that distinguished level all the time of like, I'm the best teacher doing everything. Sometimes, on days I'm doing questions that aren't open-ended, right? So it's the same thing with technology. Sometimes you just got to utilize technology that is, easy stuff in the beginning so that way you can move on to the next one. So, and then the last thing, honestly, is really just, is it saving you time? Is it really, is it making life harder for you and your students or not? Right. So time obviously has a factor, whether you're learning it or using it with students, and just thinking about those things. So it's hard for me to like get into the minds of someone who wouldn't use this stuff. But if you're on the edge of it, honestly, even just talk to people, right? I mean,
Mhm.
via online, find your tribe of people that go ahead and whether it's Twitter or whatnots, Facebook groups or whatever to talk to, reach out to me, honestly, and find people that are already utilizing some things and be like, hey, I need help. What do I begin with? And I think that knowing that you're not alone and doing it, especially art educators, honestly, we often are only teachers. We're a singleton teacher usually, where we're only teacher teaching that
Mhm.
subject in a building. So sometimes it can feel like we're on that island. So please understand you're not. You may be in a physical sense of that classroom, but you're really not. There's other people just like you that want to learn stuff and find them.
Yeah, certainly. It seems like it's all about finding community, right? So like creating a community in your classroom. I know when I was in the classroom, I would be straight up with lots of my classes and say, hey, I'm trying this thing. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know what's going to happen, but maybe we can all sort of talk about how it went together. And it sounds like you have been just as transparent with your students. And what that has created is a community of you all leveling up in your expertise of different technology tools. And then beyond the classroom, you also have this community of other educators. I know you participate in Twitter chats. There are conferences that you can go to. There are Facebook groups. There are so many things that you can find as an educator in order to be able to find your tribe, so to speak,
Right.
and then be able to lean on them with technology and things that aren't technology related. Just like,
Exactly.
hey, group, how can I be a better teacher and end up with lots of varied experiences that help you do just that? So I think that's really salient advice to kind of find your community and then rely on that community and kind of understand that that community can come in lots and lots of different forms.
No doubt. And be active in your community, right? I mean, don't get me
Mm,
wrong. I haven't, be honest, I haven't been on Twitter for, a little bit, right? But when I was active, I wasn't jumping in right away, right, on these chats. I wasn't jumping in on it. Or like even opportunities like this, like I probably say, 6, 7 years ago, I wouldn't have said, all right, yeah, I'm going to be on a podcast. Sounds great. Let's do it. But through sharing, and once you start doing it, you start realizing that, man, I'm learning so much from sharing. I'm learning a lot from just kind of sitting in the background and hearing all these things and seeing all these things. But once you really start being active and start sharing yourself, that's when all these opportunities start really coming up for you, and the growth really goes. It's like we've been saying this whole discussion, to that next level. It really does once you start sharing and be
yeah,
active in your community.
certainly. All right. I hear the bell. Maybe that means that curriculum night is going to commence really soon. So I appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes, Rich. Listeners, be sure to follow Rich. He's on LinkedIn, and maybe we can encourage him to get back active on Twitter. You can find him at r.stachon, and we're going to link his Twitter handle, his LinkedIn, all that good stuff down in the show notes. Thank y'all so much for listening. My name is Nef, and I'm looking forward to seeing y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.